What's up, guys? Today we are going over another successful and unique advanced team, Undisputed's Breloom Charizard offense. Now, before we get down to the brass tacks of why Breloom and Charizard are good, seeing as they both sit in BL, they're not your everyday OU Pokemon, we first have to examine what kind of team this is. This team would fall under the umbrella of what most in the modern advanced community would refer to as spikeless offense. I personally don't like that term. I think mixed offense is a more apt descriptor. This is in contrast to physical offense and special offense. Physical offense runs a magneton very, very often because they really need Skarmory out of the way. As seen, for example, in UD's team, the Steelix Gyarados team, that I also did a video on. By contrast, special offense often has a Dugtrio because Blissey, among other things, is really important to get rid of. So physical and special offense both use trappers so that they can focus on hitting on that one side of the spectrum. Remove Skarmory and you can go crazy with your physical attacks. Remove Blissey, you can go crazy with your special attacks. So mixed or spikeless offense, it doesn't rely on getting rid of something via trappers. It just hits on both sides of the spectrum, thus eliminating the need for those trappers and giving more immediate offense against a wide variety of threats. So the classic example that this team has neither of, it would be mixed Salamence or mixed Tyranitar. They're mostly known for their physical attacking, but when they switch over to mixed sets with Fire Blast and HP Grass, suddenly Skarmory and Swampert can't stop them anymore, and they still have Brick Break for things like Blissey and Tyranitar. So that's the kind of team that this is. And you see that same idea with the mixed Metagross as opposed to the traditional physical attackers. Mixed Swampert with Focus Punch, which is a mainstay of modern offense in advance, and even the Charizard, but we'll get to all that. So now we know that this is the mixed offense genre of team. So, as I said, this team does not have Tyranitar or Salamence, which usually make appearances on these teams. And matter of fact, if you replace Breloom and Charizard with Tyranitar and Salamence, you would have the standard spikeless / mixed offense team. I'm just going to say mixed offense from now on. So if I say mixed offense, I mean spikeless for those of you who prefer that term. So it's generally difficult to start taking Pokemon out of this generally accepted 6 with the Tyranitar and Salamence lineup because all of them perform a specific purpose, and as soon as you remove one of them, then certain threats become a lot more dangerous as the Pokemon you had that previously checked them now kind of leaves somewhat of a gaping hole in its absence. So, for example, if I were to take this team and remove the Zapdos, it would be a lot worse off against Suicune. Snorlax can't shoulder that burden all on its own. That kind of thing. So there's that you have to keep in mind when you remove those because they are the established Pokemon of this archetype for a reason. And the other thing, which is arguably more important, is that if you're a Pokemon of this kind of team, you have to hit really hard. Your damage has to stick. You have to be synergetic with your teammates. You have to draw in Pokemon that your teammates can take advantage of. For example, Zapdos draws in a special wall, and like Blissey, and that's a free switch to Metagross or Snorlax to start wreaking havoc. That kind of thing. Another important thing is that these Pokemon need to have some sort of defensive niche because Advance is not a generation where the threats are so fast and so strong that you can just kind of stack them on top of each other without regard for other Pokemon on the offensive side. You can't just go guns blazing, I'm going to beat that stall team and nothing else matters. So for the Tyranitar Salamence version of this team, then those have very distinct defensive niches. Tyranitar has that great psychic immunity, the flying resistance, fire resistance, without a quadruple grass weakness like Swampert. Salamence has different things. I've geeked out about Salamence and Metagross together in a video on this channel. And so they all come together to make up for the fact that they're not really bulky, but they're able to have defensive overlaps. Like for example, if Swampert goes down, Metagross and Salamence together are going to make sure that you still don't automatically lose to Tyranitar. Things like Thunder Wave, Zapdos also fall under this category. But another crucial part of having that defensive niche is that you need to find a way to get onto the field consistently. Otherwise, you're going to be taking up space. There are a lot of strong Pokemon out there, but not all of them are good just because they're strong. Most of them are good because they can get on the field against other common Pokemon in the metagame. And that's what Tyranitar and Salamence do. So take the example of something like Weezing. Weezing is a good Pokemon for sure. It's a great mixed attacker, but sometimes it can struggle to switch in against much of the metagame. So that's the idea. So now that we know that Breloom and Charizard have to have some sort of defensive niche, we will examine them through that lens when we get to them. What defensive utility they bring to the team, how they get on the field, and how they can dish out lots of damage and make it stick, and work with their teammates both offensively and defensively. That's really the way these teams operate. They have to have great synergy on both offense and defense. So offensively, you're breaking all the right walls, you're getting your Pokemon in the right position to do the most damage as you can. And defensively, you have to be able to switch around nicely so that you don't immediately get run over by a counterattack. You have to be smart about it. Like sometimes Salamence might be the best switch to Tyranitar, so your Metagross or Swampert don't eat an HP Grass or a Banded Earthquake. Or a Fire Blast in Metagross's case. So that kind of thing. Being able to be flexible on both offense and defense goes a long way. And being able to turn your defense into offense. Again, if you're unfamiliar with this idea and want to hear more about it, I have a video on Salamence and Metagross where it's pretty much all I talk about. Anyway, so let's get to the specifics. I asked Undisputed for his thoughts on the team, and he was kind enough to give me a nice cheat sheet. So I'm going to be consulting that for each of the sets on each of the Pokemon. And then I will examine how this team works together. So this will be a mix of his words and my interpretation of sorts, I guess. So in terms of the Zapdos set, Thunder Wave is important for stuff like Calm Mind Jirachi, especially the fast ones. But you want to avoid, and it also does things like prevent Dragon Dance Tyranitar from Dragon Dancing twice on you. I say twice instead of once because a lot of them carry Lumberry. But that's crucial. It's also crucial for making sure Salamence can't DD on you for free. Let's see, what does Undis say? Yeah, so Calm Mind Jirachi is another big one, but basically just handling setup sweepers. And in general, what Zapdos does is put Pokemon on the defensive and baton pass out for easy momentum, like U-turn in later gens. So, here's, in Undisputed's words now, strategy. Play this as an early game scout and late game cleaner. The great thing about Zapdos lead is that it forces a lot of switches early. And for example, whatever Pokemon it's scaring out, so Suicune or Salamence who doesn't know it's not HP Ice, to Blissey or Snorlax, or it forces the opponent into making a scoutable or a predictable move. So, for example, baton passing out of Tyranitar, seeing what happens. This gives perfect opportunities to get in Breloom, Snorlax, and to a lesser degree Metagross. These three are far more dangerous early to mid-game, opening holes for Zapdos, in the later stages to outspeed and KO a bunch of stuff with T-Bolt. A couple other important notes: don't risk status and damage early, and avoid clicking Thunder Wave until Breloom does its things. So, lead matchups. Versus Zapdos, dry switch out to Snorlax, low risk, low reward. Don't let it get T-Waved. In offense versus offense matchups, a lot of Zapdos will just stay in and T-Wave the opposing Zapdos just to cripple it for its teammates. Here, it could be easy to see how that would be the move because you would want to be faster than Zapdos with Swampert, Metagross, and guarantee it with Charizard, but here you don't want that. Zapdos is too valuable, and it also interferes with Breloom's Spore. Back to Undisputed. Versus Tyranitar. Click Baton Pass, see if it's going to Focus Punch, in which case you have no choice but to go to Metagross, or Breloom, in which case Rock Slide. So me jumping in here, it's kind of risky to go to Breloom immediately because there's a lot of mixed Tyranitar that have Ice Beam as their strongest attack against Zapdos, and if you just switch Breloom into it, then you're toast. So I personally might go to Metagross no matter what. Especially because Metagross threatens out T-Tar, and then you can switch right to Breloom on whatever slow Metagross thing they bring in, so Skarmory or Swampert. And from there, you are probably good. I mean, if they go to Zapdos on meta, then that's not great, so it's not the most perfect thing, but it can work. You can also just throw out an attack with Metagross and wait for an opportunity with Breloom. Alright, back to Undisputed. Versus Metagross, click Baton Pass, see if they switch, or if they stay in, they're exploding or rock sliding. So if Metagross is exploding, this is me now, if Metagross is exploding turn 1, it's a very offensive team. Breloom's usefulness is semi-limited against such a fast-paced team, so if they're going to boom, let it boom Breloom. And if they go for a banded rock slide, even better. Back to Undisputed. Versus Salamence, dry switch to Breloom, men should never stay in. If they do stay in, it's banded rock slide, you can handle that, you get a free Spore. Versus Snorlax, click Baton Pass, go to Metagross. Versus Jolteon, dry switch to Snorlax, same like with Zapdos. Be prepared to double back to Zapdos for a T-Wave onto Jolteon on the next turn. Versus Celebi, click T-Wave because lead Celebi doesn't threaten you. Get Lax, Charizard, or Metagross in. Plan to boom it at some point. Versus Venusaur, click T-Wave, try to Wake. Versus Skarmory, click Baton Pass, see if they switch. Likely Blissey, which means Breloom. Or stay in, which is but you go Breloom anyway. Versus Suicune, click Baton Pass, scout their switch. Versus Milotic, see Suicune. Versus Gengar, right to Metagross. Play under the assumption it's Calm Mind offense until proven otherwise, so be careful about offensive Calm Mind Jirachi and Celebi. So, obviously this isn't a revolutionary set, you know how Lead Zapdos works. The most important note is that Zapdos is really effective at getting Breloom into Spore and Focus Punch. So, back to me now. So that's Lead Zapdos for you. So we're now getting into, you know what, we're going to go right to Metagross and save the juicy stuff for last. So, Metagross strategy. Play as a, this is Undisputed again. Play as a strong early / mid-game breaker and insurance policy. You'll want to make a judgment call based on how the early game shapes up with Zapdos and Breloom, revealing the type of opposing team you're facing. Against defensive teams, Metagross gets a lot of mileage, so often bring it in early for some Psychics and HP Fires and explode on a key target like Celebi, Suicune, or Zapdos. Against more offensive teams, Metagross usually takes a backseat role where you look for an opportune 3-ish turn trade sequence or reserve it for the old game-clinching explosion or T-Wave into explosion kind of thing against things like Suicune. One mini objective when using this team is to set up a good explosion play. So, the EV is just outspeeding Skarm, max special attack because you need it to sting Swampert and Skarmory, and rest in HP. Next up, Snorlax. So, strategy. Play Snorlax as a wall breaker, check to special attackers, and emergency boom insurance, standard Snorlax stuff. Tend to play Snorlax really aggressively and click Focus Punch a lot, especially if there's no sand to put Lax on a timer. Metagross, Skarmory, and Tyranitar are the most common conservative switch-ins, and you threaten them all. Snorlax plays similar to Metagross, get a few attacks off, soften up the opposing team, and boom on a key threat. If you get boom off, you're almost guaranteed a positive trade since boom KOs everything besides Gengar, Skarm, and Metagross, and it still does a lot of damage to the latter two. That's really the name of the game here. Keep the momentum rolling. One special note is that you'll want to keep Snorlax at high enough health until you're relatively sure the opposing team doesn't have Starmie, because that's about as big a threat to this team as there is. Moves, Focus Punch, Self-Destruct, and Shadow Ball are all mandatory. Shadow Ball because there's no pursuit, and you can't just let Gengar ruin you, especially since Breloom is already walled by it. Counter could be changed to Body Slam, but Counter affords potential big plays against Pokemon like Metagross. The nice thing is that if you don't reveal the counter, your opponent doesn't have a good way to know whether you have Counter or Body Slam. That uncertainty forces them to make plays you can capitalize on. So, Undisputed does not know where these EVs came from, but they work, so what the hell. So, Swampert. Fun fact, this is BKC talking again. Undisputed actually invented this Swampert set and launched it into the advanced metagame in early 2018 on a Cloyster Double Electrics team. And it's become standard ever since. It's such a great tool for offense. Anyway, back to his words. Strategy: play Swampert conservatively and wait for the end game. This is important for 3 reasons. 1, the rest of the team is way more effective than Swampert early game because Swampert has many common counters like Celebi, Suicune, HP Grass, Status. 2, Swampert is the DD Tar and Rock Slide insurance every team in advance needs. 3rd and last, Swampert is a surprisingly good late game cleaner. In some games, this team functions by using momentum to eliminate Swampert answers. So people know about the Swampert by now. Moves are obvious. Not a lot of worthwhile changes. It's one of those situations where everyone knows what's coming but can't do anything to stop it anyway. Max power and speed, important. The best defense is KOing the other Pokemon first. So now let's get to the fun stuff. And I promise I will get back to my analysis of this instead of just letting Undisputed do all the work for me. So, Breloom strategy. Get it in as early as possible against something it outspeeds. Click Spore and click Focus Punch. This is the move 90% of the time. The ideal opportunity is against Tyranitar because your opponent has to choose whether to let T-Tar take the sleep, which is huge value because it's the best Pokemon in advance, or some other Pokemon take a fresh sleep, which is even huger value since if you're sporing them on the switch, it's unlikely they're going to wake up. All going to plan, you're basically immediately up 6-5 as they have one Pokemon asleep and another that's eaten a Focus Punch. The only situations that aren't ideal are against Gengar and Celebi, but overall they're a pretty neutral outcome because your opponent's forced to play into some predictable patterns. After getting the Spore and Focus Punch combo off, Loom has done its job and becomes the most expendable member of the team. It's mostly used as a pivot and a sack. If you see a high-value Sky Uppercut, i.e. against Skarm or Stun Spore, like Salaman's obviously coming in along the way, then go for it. Breloom can also be kept in certain matchups to abuse Tyranitar when your opponent lets something else go to sleep. One last note is that there are some teams that are just 6-0 by Breloom. They tend to be the kind that's weak to Heracross, like Skarm, Bliss, Suicune, no Gengar, no Sand, that kind of thing. Claydol. In those matchups, Breloom kind of cruises and you can conserve it rather than sack it. If your opponent has Gengar, he should reveal it right away. The EVs and Stun Spore are specifically for this situation. They allow you to always live Gengar Ice Punch from full, and other moves by other mons by extension, so like Swampert Ice Beam. And if you're full health, you can safely Stun Spore the opposing Gengar, which is basically just as good as KOing it. If you're not full health, you can switch out to Metagross or Snorlax, get Breloom back in at some point, and then Stun Spore when your opponent makes the obvious switch to Gengar to counter. Alternatively, you might run into Celebi, but it has to run Recover to be annoying. It's not really a threat per se, but it's hard to kill. Obviously, Charizard's going to be main counter to these Celebis. However, since most people won't leave their Celebi in against Charizard, you're going to have to plan ahead. You're going to have to plan ahead with Metagross and Snorlax and finesse them with an explosion, since Celebi is often a counterplay to these Pokemon too. Loom is great for forcing your opponent to reveal the Celebi and planning ahead to beat it. So, yeah, that's pretty much Breloom for you. Next up, finally, Charizard. Strategy. Play this as a mid to late game breaker and sweeper as well as coverage for some threats like Celebi and Jirachi. Typical play pattern tends to be getting Charizard in against something like Metagross, Celebi, Jirachi, Skarmory, etc. that's threatened by Fire Blast. Then you have the option to Fire Blast for great damage even against mons that resist it. Alternatively, based on what you've seen and deduced about the other team, Focus Punch gives you room to outplay, especially the likes of Blissey and Tyranitar. Ideally, you don't click the Dragon Claw slot ever, but it's a last-ditch threat against something like Salaman's threatening to DD or Flygon that thinks it can Toxic or Rock Slide or something. Moves, the Dragon Claw slot can be varied, but ideally you never use it anyway. Best strategy might be to leave your opponent unsure what the fourth move is because they'll usually assume it's the worst one for them. Substitute is the most obvious one that people assume when they see a lefty's Charizard. So, All right, that's it. So, back to BKC words. Thank you to Undisputed for giving me that. Otherwise, I probably would have made some misinterpretation, like saying Zapdos will probably stay into Thunder Wave on the first turn against other Zapdos. So, thank God, right? Yeah. So, while we were going through Undisputed's words, you may have noticed terms like positive trade and high value, and that's a good way of sussing out how this team should be viewed, because it's not just about bashing the opponent with strong attacks. I mean, the Pokemon here are strong, but they're not nuclear. You know, there's not even a choice band anywhere. So it's about being smart with how you choose to receive damage, how you choose to respond to dish out your own, and that sort of thing. Like the Snorlax example is obviously the best one because you need it, otherwise Starmie will just slice through everything. You have to keep Zapdos and Metagross at full health, and it's just not ideal. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing you need. So another example, Breloom having low value once it's Sport and Focus Punch, because it loses a lot of threat once it's used that Spore. So even something like Swampert can stay in and Ice Beam against it. So that's how this team should be viewed. So another thing I want to mention. So earlier we discussed getting these guys in on the fields, and so they can have defensive utility and use that defensive utility to generate offense. So the obvious way to do it is with the crutch of Baton Pass Zapdos, because Zapdos forces switches and then you get your Pokemon in for free. It doesn't work with every Pokemon, obviously. If Zapdos Baton passes out of Blissey, then your first response probably isn't going to be to go to Suicune, for example, but that's the idea. And it works well with a frailer Pokemon like Breloom, because Breloom is really strong and not that bulky, and not that fast either. But it works because things that threaten Zapdos, like Tyranitar and Blissey and Snorlax and even the odd Regice, then Breloom can take advantage of those. Get that Spore off, get that Focus Punch off. If they've got a Mence or a Gengar or something annoying, you can just Stun Spore them. And obviously you are not restricted to Focus Punch to dish out fighting type damage, since Sky Uppercut is still really powerful. So that lets Breloom come in and threaten Tyranitar and Snorlax and Blissey later in the game. This is really big. It's not necessarily just from Zapdos' Baton Pass either, obviously, because you can come in off a switch, like if Charizard is facing Breloom down, for example. So that's how Breloom comes in against those slower Pokemon, because a well-known thing about Zapdos is that its counters are usually slower than it. The one exception is like Jolteon, which gets Thunder Waved. So when you can get that in, then when you can take advantage of these slow Pokemon with something as potentially devastating as Breloom, it's a match made in heaven. That's how it comes in. Other than that, it's not going to come in against much except like, besides Tyranitar Rock Slide, honestly not a lot. It'll maybe be able to threaten like a Magneton or something if they're running HP Grass, but generally that's why you get it in early. This kind of team, you don't sit around waiting. You have to take advantage, because the longer the game stretches on, then the better for the defensive team you're trying to break, usually. Because you're going to be worn down by spikes and sand and whatnot, and you need to do as much damage to them in as short a time frame as possible. Otherwise, they're just going to wear you out to the point where you can't beat them anymore. You've taken too much damage everywhere, and you get cleaned up by Gengar or Aerodactyl or Starmie. So, and against offense, obviously, you want to be doing damage as much as possible too, because while this team and mixed offense in general has defensive utility in its Pokemon, it's not meant to last for a long time like a Scar and Bliss team would. It's meant to last long enough so that you can get your Pokemon in and do a lot of damage. So, having examined how Breloom gets in and does damage, what about Charizard? You never hear about Charizard having good defensive utility. It's weak to rock, weak to water. What gives? Well, if you have watched my Moltres video, then a lot of similarities apply to Charizard. And it's even better in a way because it's a lot faster and it has Focus Punch, meaning Tyranitar and Blissey cannot come in for free. Blissey can still threaten with Soft Whale, but it's basically the weapon. For example, if you Focus Punch as Blissey comes in, and then you just happily switch to Metagross as Blissey attacks, then you're fine, because Blissey is at very low health and can't switch into Charizard or Zapdos anymore. And even if they Soft Boil, they're not going to out-damage the Focus Punch, so next time they have to be wary about keeping about switching Blissey into Focus Punch. So if you're playing aggressively, you're going to continue to force them into positions like this over and over and over again. So, but how does Charizard hit the field besides Baton Pass Zapdos? I mean, those Pokemon you mentioned, Tyranitar and Blissey and Snorlax, that's not something Charizard really abuses. What it does abuse is Celebi, which is quite useful. But other than that, how else will Charizard come in on the field? Well, it is immune to ground, and there are a lot of earthquakes flying around. I mean, even if you come in against something like Swampert, if it's running the standard set of Earthquake, Ice Beam, Hydro, and Protect, then 3 of those 4 moves you don't care about at all. So, there's that for it. And most notably, it comes out on Metagross. And I know that seems like a weird idea. Metagross is so strong and Charizard is so frail and has a minus defense nature. Now, this isn't supposed to be a long-term thing. However, Charizard can switch into many Metagross attacks, pretty much all except Rock Slide, and if they boom your Charizard, then you still got rid of the Metagross, so hooray for Snorlax. But the other thing is that mostly, like Meteor Mash, you can take one. And Metagross uses Earthquake a lot, like against this Metagross on this team. So you can get Charizard in, and what's nice about it is that it threatens OHKOs. Similarly to Moltres, there are a lot of steals in OU, Meta, Skarmory, Jirachi. You're not OHKOing Jirachi, but you're threatening it really hard. Magneton's a big one, and then you pair that with Pokemon like Celebi, sometimes Heracross. And a lot of time their resists are not so great because Tyranitar gets melted by Focus Punch. So that's the difference between Charizard and Moltres. Moltres leaves everything crippled with a Will-O-Wisp. Charizard threatens to kill. It also has less special attacks, so you have to be careful about HP grassing Swampert, for example, lest it live and blast you with a Torrent Water move. But that can be played around, especially if Swampert has switched into Metagross and eaten a Psychic before. So, Metagross eats, you Psychic the Pert with Metagross on the switch, you switch to Charizard as they go for Earthquake, you're in business. So, that's its main target. And, Celebes and Jirachis in mid-game, that's kind of stuff. If Heracross is facing down Metagross, go to Charizard. It Quadresist Megahorn scares Heracross out with an OHKO. And it's got that great speed tier, so it's going to be doing a lot of damage to a lot of stuff. The problem with Charizard, and on the original team, the most iconic variation of mixed offense, mixed Salamence and mixed Tyranitar is Milotic. So Charizard definitely is not unwallable, but that's where your Snorlax and your Zapdos and your Breloom come in. So it enables these guys to come in and force the opponent. Basically, when you have that hard counter, you have to play the same way every time. Otherwise, you're getting KO'd. Instead of going to your counter, you're just dying to whatever, which is dumb. And this team has so much offense everywhere that it can become easy to exploit. Oh, well, Breloom's in, so I have to go to Celebi. Oh, no, he went to Charizard. Well, I have to go to Milotic. Oh, no, he went to Snorlax. And this kind of thing. Obviously, if they can't actually break your defensive core, then you'll just switch all day and you won't care. But this team is generally good at opening up those defensive cores thanks to the double booms and the sleep. Sleep taking something out of commission is great. And the focus punches, especially from Charizard, those are some big ones. So It's actually got 3 focus punches, funnily enough. So, yeah, that's that. And you always threaten the Milotic with Boom, because as soon as Milotic goes down, everything is going crazy. Milotic famously stops Mixpert too. So, now that we know how all those guys get on the field, I wanted to mention one more time the idea of positive trading, because it just sounds like something you do with stocks, right? And I don't know anything about that. But in this sense, then if it doesn't quite make sense to you, think of it like this. If I have a Blissey against a team of 5 fighting types and a Gengar, this is a stupid example, but bear with me. If I have a team against Blissey, I have a Blissey, my opponent has 5 fighting types and a Gengar. Blissey is terrible against those fighting types, but it beats Gengar. If Gengar explodes on my Blissey and kills my Blissey, that is a hugely positive trade for me. What did I need Blissey for? It had no value against those 5 fighting types. So I hope that that example made sense. If you want more examples, please just ask me in the comments and I'll gladly go into it. But that's the kind of thing you're looking for. I mentioned it when I used this team in my most recent video. So like if I explode with my Metagross against a sleeping Metagross that doesn't threaten me at all, that's a positive trade for my opponent, because what's he going to do with his sleeping Metagross? Assuming he can still handle Snorlax. You know, Metagross is just Charizard bait anyway. So, or like when you sacrifice a sleeping Pokemon after the opponent's sleeper has already gone down. So if Breloom goes down and you have to pick a Pokemon to sack, maybe choose the sleeping one. It's not like you're going to get slept again, and it's not going to do anything for you because it's asleep. So that's the idea anyway. So I think we have a good idea of how this team works on paper. You know, offense, back and forth, synergy, positioning your Pokemon, knowing what's valuable, knowing the attacks and predictions you have to make. And yeah, so now we have examples. We have a couple of replays. So this first one, I will say while I adjust my screen, is that I have a video analyzing the hell out of this game, and I encourage you to check it out if it interests you further. So, yeah, this was the debut of this team on the big stage. I did mention it was a successful team in addition to just being unique. You know, anyone can use Banded Dodrio, but it doesn't really interest me unless it's winning when it matters. So, if I've apologized, or I apologize to any fans of Dodrio I may have offended there. Anyway, so I think my dimensions are good now. So, I won't be overanalyzing this game and the following games, especially since that's not the point of this, and especially this game because it's already at the channel. But yeah, I encourage anyone, but this is just to show how the team functions. So, see, there's the Zapdos switch. Celebi's a problem. He knows he's going to have to get rid of that somehow, and it's also his cue to bring in Charizard, and he's got to keep going back to Lax. So if you get your offensive momentum, if you're not having a ton of offensive momentum, you will definitely fall behind and potentially get worn down by repeated attacks like that. So wear down the Skarmory a little, get some damage in exchange for the spike. See, that was a trade of sorts. It wasn't really a I mean, if I had to rank the trade, it was still a win for Face because spikes, but it was a trade of sorts because Phil made sure he was not going to get those spikes for nothing. He got a little bit of health back on Lax. He damaged it. This makes Skarmory have a harder time switching into Metagross. That means Celebi might have to fight the Metagross, which means blowing up, which means fun for Zapdos and Breloom. So that is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So now the Charizard's coming in on the second spike. So that was a better trade since the second spike, at this point, it's fine. Second spike isn't that much of a difference, and now he wants Charizard in to do damage now that he's already damaged the Skarm. And now, with Zapdos, Celebi, Skarm, probably pretty unlikely we see a Blissey because it would have that team would have a lot of problems fitting things in. So that means it's almost surely going to be a Swampert, and then a Tyranitar, and then something like Gengar. I mean, that is what the team is, I know it, but that's what makes sense on that kind of thing. You can throw in your other stuff like Dugtrio. Dugtrio for Gengar is also a well-known team. But the point is, whatever it's going to be, odds are Charizard's going to threaten it greatly, so, just like Salaman's was, with its fat wood, with its fire and grass coverage. Since Zapdos is not weak to them, but it's definitely not taking those Fire Blasts well, especially the Stab Fire Blast. So here's a problem. Now Fakes is in a bad position because if he goes to Tyranitar and gets Focus Punch, that's just bad news bears, so he decides Skarmory's not that valuable, I already got my second layer, and I'm just going to go to Tyranitar and put on the offense afterwards. So that was a smart move from Phil, not overdoing it, knowing how threatening Charizard is to these teams. So now he's got Breloom in, and even with Celebi at 80%, then he's still going to Spore and potentially do something. See, Swampert goes down, sleeping. Now he Focus Punches. He tries to burn a turn. You know, if he went to Celebi or Gengar, then who knows. But that also meant that Swampert was not going to be waking up. If he had done that, Swampert would not have been waking up. So free Charizard later. So, see, here Breloom is the sack, rather than going to Snorlax and getting him messed up. So, he does have to try and T-Wave it here. That's what it's there for. But it's just not, you just don't T-Wave early to interfere with Breloom. So, here's the Metagross duking it out. And there's another trade. Zapdos is a big threat, and trading Metagross for Zapdos is good if he knows he can handle the Tyranitar and Celebi and the last, which he has to have some inclination of what it is. So he goes to Lax, not great because of the banded Tar, and he just blows it up. So, but see, this team's still not out. It's always fighting because it's just got so much offense. Obviously, it can definitely get messy against a team that has spikes and has threats on top of it. That's tough to deal with in a prolonged match. That's why you got to do as much damage in as short a time frame as you can. So, spoiler here, Swampert being saved until the end of the game to have that cushion against Tyranitar. And yeah, I will just let this one go. And boom. So our next game, I don't know what this was for, but this is Zomog versus Linear Curve. And it was a good one. Zomog is the one using the team here. He goes to Breloom early on the Mence. That was a smart move. But that one scenario we talked about happened in that his Zapdos counter was Celebi, so he couldn't quite do that. So here's Psychic Metagross paying dividends because this team is offense, meaning it cannot switch into Moltres. So the choice of whether to eat Will-O-Wisp or Fire Blast or HP Grass is always messy. So he goes to Snorlax, assuming Fire Blast. I think Will-O-Wisp was smart there. And Zapdos was fine either way, especially because he's not doing a lot of offense. And he would force Moltres out, but the point is more that you see he eats the Will-O-Wisp there. I guess he really was just afraid. And that's what's going to happen now. He's not able to force anything with Zapdos in terms of relevant damage, but he is able to force situations that would put Linear in a spot where he has a tough time switching into one of the Pokemon on his team, or where Gross or Lax would blow something up and then there's a hole opened and that would be taken advantage of by one of his other Pokemon. Or if he had Baton passed on Celebi there, Charizard's got a free shot and it can get scary because Moltres is not a great check, especially once it took that Psychic. So here we see Metagross zeroing in on that Celebi, trying to get the boom off for it, and he takes out Moltres instead, which is still fine because he has Charizard, so that was a positive trade. Get rid of the pseudo Charizard check and get rid of the thing that's threatening the entire team. And there's no sand yet, so Snorlax is in a great spot. And yeah, so positive trade overall, whether he hit Celebi or he hit the Moltres. So here we're going to see the utility of counter, as no other move would have been able to do what it just did here, and it's still fresh on top of that. So here we see how the team works in a sandless environment, and that's crucial because something I didn't mention while we were going over the team is that what Tyranitar does for these teams a lot is that it doesn't, that it brings sand, obviously, and that's crucial for keeping Pokemon like Suicune at low health when they've taken an attack from something like Salamence or Charizard, and or Metagross and Swampert, and it's immensely useful for offensive pressure, other Snorlax being a great example, but not only does Undisputed not miss the sand here, thanks to Breloom's unique nature, Charizard too. And Charizard's great because the Fire-Grass combo destroys all the sand immunes, where it wouldn't have made a difference. So like Skarm and Pert, for example. It definitely would be helpful against Celebi, but the nice thing is that without sand, Snorlax is a lot better, benefits a lot. So in terms of longevity, which means more attacks, which means more pressure, more offense, good thing. So that's how that works. Anyway, moving on. So you gotta see, look, there's the Spore, and even with the team with Celebi, then if he just gets spored with Celebi, then that's, oh my god, do I stay in and do I let Charizard come in for free? And I mean, here it's not as clear because he can stun spore the Ments. He's got the weapons, basically. He can't switch into Snorlax safely anymore. It's definitely going to take something. So he lets the relatively useless Magneton go. And so that's an example of how perilous Breloom can be. So get that Charizard in and suddenly things are dropping. I mean, he didn't expect Charizard to have Dragon Claw. He thought it wasn't that big a deal. But as we're going to see, here it is a big deal as Celebi Baton passed out. And here we also see Charizard's lesser special attack stat floundering against a healthy Swampert, but he can still force it, you know. He's in Blaze range now. That's another advantage Charizard has over Moltres. Blaze, so that Fire Blast does a ton. He's definitely in range now. So the Breloom Charizard synergy, the synergy of these two alone is just beautiful. So yeah, this was really well done by Zomog against a tough opponent, and showing off just how scary this team is. So Focus Punch, boom, and that's it. So the last game I will just go over very quickly, and normally I would never use myself, but since I literally had this in a video just yesterday at the time of recording, then you know, if you want to see the more in-depth analysis, then go back and watch that. But this is just more examples of how good Breloom and Charizard are together and how they generate a ton of offense. See, just putting something out of commission is just so delightful. So, and there's the Stun Spore because Gengar and Zapdos, and see, now Lax and Focus Punch is just such a great move on Lax, does so much against its most dangerous switch-ins. And by running Focus Punch, you're not walled by Skarmory, so no need for Mag, so free team slot, and all the stuff we discussed at the beginning. So, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So congratulations to Undisputed on making a great team. It's seen quite a bit of success and has helped shape the metagame. He's used Breloom on more than one occasion, but it's definitely helped bring attention to Breloom and Charizard. Other players have done that as well, but what's unique about this team is that a lot of players will use a team with one unorthodox Pokemon, because past that, then you're usually giving up on too much. But he managed to make a team with 2 BLs, and it's not for the lol factor, like, oh, I'm using BLs and beating OU. It's because they are genuinely the best Pokemon for the job, and they work beautifully together, and I think that's a great thing about Advance, and I'm really happy to see it pulled off. So congratulations to him. thank you for the write-up. That was very helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it inspires you to get out there and use Breloom and Charizard, but not too much because they're really good and I don't want to start losing on the ladder because they are real pains in the behind. I mean, they're flawed, obviously. They have things that hold them back, but they are really good in the current advanced metagame. And I don't see that changing. I don't think they're fads. I think they're just good Pokemon, and we now know what they are capable of. And we know they're not gimmicks, that they can be used in high-level tournament play when you need to win. That Phil versus Fakes game, that was a World Cup tiebreaker. So, yeah, alright. Gonna call it there. So, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.